All right, so in this interview, we've got the Vice President JD Vance's first interview. And as usual, the Face the Nation host is going to try to push propaganda and the media's overwhelming obsession with Trump derangement is going to be popping out. But as usual, Vice President JD Vance takes her to task. So without further ado, let's check out how VP JD Vance. I got to get used to that. Let's check out VP Vance, as he schools this CBS host. Check this out.
Pete Heith, it was a tie. Bipartisan opposition, smallest margin since the job was created. You would break that tie. If the nominee can't unite your party, how's he going to lead 3 million people?
Well, look, I think Pete is a disruptor, and a lot of people don't like that disruption. But, Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan, massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on. And I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president.
So the main objective is changing all of that it's going to be Pete Hegseth alone?
I'd say the main problem the main thing that we want Pete Hegseth to do is to fix the problems at the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, there are many. We've gotten into way too many wars that we don't have a plan for winning. We've gotten into way too many misadventures that we shouldn't have got into in the very first place. And our procurement process, Margaret, is incredibly broken. We're in an era. Decisions. Well, of course, they're policy decisions, but they're also logistical and implementation decisions. If you look at where we are with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of drone technology and drone warfare, we have to really, top to bottom, change the way that we fund the procurement of weapons, the way that we arm our troops. This is a major period of disruption, and we think Pete Hegseth is the guy to lead the job. Now, there's another element to this, Margaret, too, which is we believe that military morale, at least until the election of President Trump, was historically low. You have the Army missing recruitment goals by tens of thousands of soldiers, and already recruitment is starting to pick up because Pete Hegseth is fundamentally a warfighter's leader at the Department of Defense. He's a guy who sees not...
Well, of course, yeah, the numbers are improving because people who was wanting to join the military, the way our military was ran over the last 4 years, if you didn't know this, they were literally doing drag queen story hour on military bases. And you may have thought this was just in schools, but they were doing drag shows on military bases. Their focus was more on DEI and hitting certain quotas rather than giving us the leanest and the meanest fighting machine, in the world. And so if you're a young man and you're being told men are bad, men are terrible, especially if you're a young white man, why would you want to go join something like that when you feel like you're not appreciated? And then with the way the Democrats are always promoting victimhood and the disdain for America, if you're a young black man or a young brown man, why would you want to join the force to support a country that they constantly tell you hates you, that they constantly tell you puts you at the back, puts you at the bottom? And so you've taken white males who are always being told they're the enemy and they're the problem, and you've alienated them. Then you've taken black males and brown males and made them believe the country hates them. So why would they support? And the big push was for women. And I'll tell you, in my whole life, I have never seen women that are just fighting to be at the front line of battle. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But let me ask you, do you see that? Now, I believe in certain administrative positions, women can be equal to men, no doubt. But forgive me. No, don't forgive me. What I'm going to say, this is my opinion. If we're in battle and we're on the front line and say that hand-to-hand combat has to kick up, or somebody got to be carried off while still being able to maintain and monitor and protect other soldiers. And thanks for watching this video. And while you're here, do me a solid. Hit that like button if you're enjoying the content. On this channel, I share sales strategy and political and current events. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you hit that notification bell and select all. That way you'll be updated whenever I release new videos. I believe the ratio, the amount of women who are qualified to be able to do that is substantially small. Now, what that means is because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if there's somebody who's not as strong, not as fast, not as capable to hold their weight, and they just happen to be a female, now that's a distraction because they want to make sure that they're taking care of her. Do you remember that attempt on the president's life? Go back and look at that picture. Matter of fact, I'm gonna post it in this video if I get a chance. Because if you look at the height and the size of all the other agents around him, and you look at President Trump's most vulnerable spot, it was right there where that female agent was at, the one that was so focused on her sunglasses. It was right there. So again, we're talking about the military. We're not talking about corporate America. We're not talking about any of that. I'm only talking about in the military. I believe every country in the world puts their strongest and their most capable when it comes to defending their country and going into battle. So the fact that we got Pete Hegseth, who is focused on building a strong military rather than being this DEI agenda-focused leader, while other countries get stronger, their militaries get more fierce. Ours was, getting lean, all right, but it was from lack of participation, lack of new recruits being able to recruit people. And not to mention the way that veterans have been treated with this illegal immigrant situation. Veterans are being tossed on the street literally by the Biden admin so that illegal immigrants can get their housing. That doesn't do a lot for morale. So I'm glad that, JD Vance VP Vance responded the way that he did while this host is trying to get a gotcha.
You campaigned on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all of these executive orders. Which one lowers prices?
No, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a little bit of time, right? The president has been president for all of 5 days. I think that in those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. We're going to work with Congress. We're, of course, going to have more executive orders, and we're going to try the way that you lower prices is that you encourage more capital investment into our country. And you ask specifically, what executive order is going to help lower prices? All of the stuff that we've done on energy, to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States of America. One of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in energy prices. Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices. And I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump and at the grocery store, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
And while we've done a whole lot, we can't undo all of the damage of Joe Biden's presidency in 4 days.
Well, there are a lot of things that contributed to higher energy.
Boom. Now, did you see how this host, she is so focused on, hey, Trump hasn't lowered costs. He didn't lower prices. He's been in office for 5 days, as of 6 days right now. Now, for 4 years, as inflation was surging, you know what they told us? Inflation was transitory. You know what they told us? Oh, inflation was because of Ukraine and Russia. Oh, inflation was because you greedy Americans. They even blamed it on the American citizens at one point. Everything except the fact that when Joe Biden took office, they immediately spent $2.7 trillion in that ballooned up omnibus bill in the Green New scam, where they were giving people millions of dollars to find out how a caterpillar acted on cocaine. And this might sound funny, but those type of things were really in it. Crazy stuff like to see if a starfish enjoys Coca-Cola and they get $1 million. Not to mention how much money we gave to Ukraine, the hundreds of billions we gave to one of the largest money laundering schemes, allegedly, the world has ever seen. Ukrainian government is one of the most corrupt governments in the world, which is exactly why when Joe Biden fired that prosecutor in Ukraine, he withheld $1 billion. He's on tape bragging about this. When he withheld $1 billion is because the special prosecutor was investigating an energy company in Ukraine, Burisma. And they put Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma, even though he has no energy experience, none. He was not a foreign agent, but yet they put him on this board, paid him something like $1 million a year or something. Why did they do that? Just because they felt good and just plucked out an American with no experience, none, and put him on the board? No. It's because they wanted help, because that company was so corrupt and that special prosecutor was on it. So what did they do? They got Hunter to get in touch with the big guy, and the big guy went over there and told them if that special prosecutor told the government, if that special prosecutor isn't fired and off this case, you're not getting $1 billion. And like Joe Biden says in the video, what do you know? They was fired within hours. Within hours. So these energy costs and things that we have that skyrocketed were all behind the overspending that we did. See, when you overspend, when you spend more than what your GDP is, and GDP is gross domestic product, when you're spending more than the country was bringing in, that's a problem. And what inflation is the amount at which prices increase and based on the rate at which wages increase. So when you see a 9.3% inflation, that means that price increases are outpacing wages by 9.3%. And even when you see him says, well, hey, inflation has dropped. It's gone from 9.3 to 2.7. Everybody says, whoa, inflation is down. No, what that means is just that at that month, the increase in prices has slowed down to where it's only outpacing the wages at a 2.7% pace. But it does not mean that inflation has dropped. It's slowed. Okay. And when they say, oh, it went from 9.3 down to 2.9, that is the Biden administration competing against its own horrible numbers. When Donald Trump left office, inflation was at 1.9%. Because as a country, you got to have a little bit of debt. Debt is good, and that's a whole nother video. But when this lady talking about these prices, she's being disingenuous because they know those were those Biden policies. They know by cutting in on stopping us from drilling and producing gas, to keep us from producing gas, energy prices skyrocketed. And you need energy to make everything. Energy literally is the foundation for everything. So when energy prices go up, everything's going up. When energy prices go down, everything else can go down. So now they're holding Trump accountable for he didn't get the prices down in 5 days, while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had 4 years. Matter of fact, they didn't even address that prices were a problem until Kamala was running for president. She gets up there, yeah, I know, prices are too high. They are. Telling us something that we don't already know. Crazy.
The president did say he wants to do something with an executive order in relation to federal emergency response. He said he may reform or eliminate FEMA. Instead of sending emergency responders, he may start to send a percentage of money to states to take care of themselves. But, FEMA has specialized expertise that some of these states just don't have.
Oh, Margaret,
I totally disagree with that. I believe there's no way that FEMA has more expertise in an area than the actual local and state government does about that area. These people that were born and raised in these areas, been there their whole life, have built their businesses, raised their children, gone to church. They're in these areas. They know it backwards and forwards. And like President Trump said, you got an outside organization coming in that's going to tell them how things should go and how things should be done. Because when everything is done, these folks, the FEMA folks, get to leave and don't have to deal with the aftermath that things aren't done right. And then let's talk about the bureaucracy and the red tape. They dump all that money into FEMA. How much of that money actually gets to the people? How much of that money? We saw what happened during Hurricane Katrina. FEMA had all of those resources and money, and buses were sitting unused. Facilities were unused that people could have stayed in while folks were dying. They were waiting days and weeks for FEMA to get all their coordinations, and this person approved that and that while people were dying. Let's look at North Carolina. In West North Carolina, you have people that work for FEMA that were refusing to help folks if they had a Trump sign in their yard. Whenever, and they're ran out of D.C., and we know if it's based and housed out of D.C., 9 times out of 10, it's a leftist group. It's employed by leftists who will do anything they can. These people are so despicable and disgusting that during a natural disaster, their partisanship, they'll play politics and don't care about who it hurts. People make me sick. They really do with that. And so he's right. And like I live in Florida. In Florida, whenever we have a natural disaster, our state government ends up taking care of what we got to get done. Our local companies come together, our state government, and the citizens, the volunteers, and we've had some horrific hurricanes hit here. And guess what? We've done just fine. FEMA, look at what's happening in California. These people aren't even allowed to go back to their properties, and they need permits, which they're being told is going to take 18 months for them to rebuild their own property. They can't even go get the debris off because in California, they want these contractors to come in that's going to charge the people to remove the debris. And so I'm 100% behind removing FEMA, giving that money to the states, because while they're waiting on FEMA to get everything together and waiting on FEMA to get people there and waiting on FEMA to reach out to whoever they got to reach out to in D.C. to get approval to do. No. Everything should be centralized right there in that state. The governor be the head, be the figurehead as far as on, making sure everybody is anointed in the right spots. And then you work your way down from there. You got your governors, you got your senators, you got your Congress folks, you got your state legislatures, you got your state senators, your state congressional body, you got your volunteers, you got people that know the area, love the area, and have a vested interest in protecting, preserving and rebuilding, if necessary, those areas. Those people that work for FEMA don't have any love or loyalty to that area, to that place. So that's a great thing.
So, and how will states who are lower income states, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas, be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
But these
Let's
are
be
the
honest,
first
Margaret,
responders.
you talk about the expertise from FEMA. FEMA in North Carolina, in California, in Florida with some of the hurricanes has often been a disaster. And it's not because we don't have good people at FEMA. It's because bureaucratic red tape and garbage prevents the rapid deployment of resources
But
to the
the
people who need
states
it.
are now going to have to do this themselves?
The president is trying to encourage us to reform the way that we deliver emergency response in a way that gets resources
So
to
don't
people
take him
who need it.
literally.
No,
Is what you're saying.
we should take the president at his word that FEMA needs desperate reform, because it does. Margaret, when I went to North Carolina as VP-elect before we were sworn in, people would talk about how FEMA would get resources, food, medicine, water to a warehouse, but then would have no plan to get it from the warehouse to the people in the mountains who are literally starving and thirsting to death.
Mm-hmm.
We can do so much better, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we will.
But they work with the state and local officials.
They often don't work
now
well
it's
enough. And again, that's
going to
not
be on the
because
state and local officials.
the FEMA management officials don't work well enough with state and local officials to get resources to the people who need it. We should expect, this is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of President Trump's leadership, the American people should expect more of their government. When there's a terrible disaster, they should expect food, medicine, and water to get to the people who need it. When there's a terrible fire in California, the fire hydrants all to actually turn on. I am sick of the American people having such low expectations for their government. They should demand more of us because it's the greatest country in the world, and that's what Donald Trump's leadership promises to bring back.
So still count on the federal government, but watch that space. Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action?
Yeah, I got to stop real quick. These folks trip me out. They say this stuff on TV. Oh, schools or churches. Where do you believe illegal immigrants will go hide once they hear on television that this is where ICE won't go? It's the same thing about what's going on with Gaza. They're all in an uproar because, oh my God, something hit the school or hit the hospital. Well, that's because those people that want to do harm, they know that you don't want them to touch this building. So I can shield myself. I can let loose and let off everything I want. Then to protect myself, I'll go into these places where they can't get me. That is a horrible strategy. These folks got to know, no matter where you are, under a rock, behind a tree, in a phone booth on Mars, we'll come and get you.
In a church service, at school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that, and I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe
So
Biden.
you personally
let them talk
support them
about
going into
people like
schools
Lincoln
and
Riley who were
churches?
brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question, Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
But
the law
that also
everywhere
has
to
a
protect
knock-on
Americans.
effect. A chilling.
He just got it. He said, hey, if a murder was in the school, would you want him to go get him? Yeah, exactly. But the fact that she says that, like, oh, well, they said we shouldn't do this. Yet, we don't hear her talk about the Lincoln Riley Act and how 145 Democrats didn't want to support that.
Ask you about refugee admissions, which were just suspended by the president. That has nothing to do with the U.S. border. Refugee screening takes 18 to 24 months to go through. They are heavily vetted. Left literally at the airport this week were thousands of Afghans some of whom had worked with the United States government and were promised to come here. When you talked to us in August, you said, I don't think we should abandon anybody who's been properly vetted and helped us. Do you stand by that?
Well, Margaret, I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. So clearly not all of these foreign nationals
but there are
have been properly
30,000
vetted.
people in the pipeline, Afghan refugees.
But my primary
Do you stand by
concern
that?
as the Vice President, Margaret, is to look after the American people. And now that
So
we
no.
know that we have vetting problems with a lot of these refugee programs, we absolutely cannot unleash thousands of unvetted people into our country.
These
It's
people are
not
vetted.
good.
These people are vetted.
Just like the guy who planned a terrorist attack in Oklahoma a few months ago, he was allegedly properly vetted. And many people in the media and the Democratic Party said that he was properly vetted. Clearly he wasn't. I don't want my children to share a neighborhood with people who are not properly vetted. And because I don't want it for my kids, I'm not going to force any other American citizens' kids to do that either.
No.
These Democrats are insane. Now, she's talking about, vetted properly. How'd she know? She has no idea. Then right when he said, just like the Oklahoma person who they said was vetted, and think about the information and who it's coming from. Just like Joe Biden was healthy, right? He was sane. Just like Kamala Harris was black, right? And was Obama 2.0. Just like the border was secure. Just like inflation was transitory. These people make me sick.
Oh, and that was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
2 weeks ago, you were on Fox News, and you said, if you protested peacefully on January 6th and had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously, you shouldn't be pardoned. Did you counsel the president against these blanket pardons for 1,500 people,
Well, Margaret, I noticed,
including those who committed violence?
Margaret, I noticed that you cut off the thing that I said immediately after that. The full quote is that, of course, there are gray areas. And here's the nature of the gray area. Merrick Garland's Department of Justice denied constitutional protections in the prosecutions. There were double standards in how sentences were applied to the J6 protesters versus other groups. What the president said consistently on the campaign is that he was going to look at a case-by-case basis, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at 1,600 cases, and the thing that came out of it, Margaret, is that there was a massive denial of due process of liberty, and a lot of people were denied their constitutional rights. The president believes that. I believe that, and I think he made the right decision.
Daniel Rodriguez used an electroshock weapon against a policeman who was dragged out of the defensive line by plunging it into the officer's neck. He was in prison, sentenced to 12 years, 7 months. He got a pardon. Ronald McAbee hit a cop while wearing reinforced brass knuckle gloves, and he held one down on the ground as other rioters assailed the officer for over 20 seconds, causing a concussion. If you stand with law enforcement, how can you call these people unjustly imprisoned?
Margaret.
Now, this coming from the same party that was screaming defund the police 2 years ago.
You're separating, there's an important issue here. There's what the people actually did on January the 6th, and we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly. And then what did Merrick Garland's Department of Justice do in unjustly prosecuting well over 1,000 Americans in a way that was politically
Is
motivated?
violence like that against a police officer ever justified?
Violence against a police officer is not justified, but that doesn't mean that you should have Merrick Garland's weaponized Department of Justice expose you to incredibly unfair process, to denial of constitutional rights, and frankly, to a double standard that was not applied to many people, including, of course, the Black Lives Matter rioters who killed over 24 people and never had the weight of a weaponized Department of Justice come against them. The pardon power is not just for people who are angels or people who are perfect. And of course, we love our law enforcement and want people to be peaceful with everybody, but especially with our good cops. That's a separate issue from what Merrick Garland's Department of Justice did. We rectified a wrong, and I stand by it.
With those riots, those BLM riots, 24 people were killed. Police officers killed. Police stations taken over, burnt to the ground. J6ers, most of those people were walking, taking pictures. And if you see the video, they were let in. They were walking through, they were chilling. No cop died on January the 6th. No one. Now, granted, any assault against law enforcement is terrible. And those folks do deserve to be punished. But like he said, deserving to be punished, but then having no due process are two totally different things. Feeling somebody needs to be punished, yeah, but they still deserve the due process. And the punishment has got to be, justifiably, correct for the potential crime. If you walk through, you walked into the Capitol on that day, and yet you've been waiting 2.5 years sitting in a prison cell, and you have not been to court, you have not had due process, that's unconstitutional. And here's the real kicker. None of those people on J6 were even charged with insurrection. But yet we call them insurrectionists. The propaganda is insane. Those people just amaze me. They're so concerned with big tech now. But literally, we talking about just months ago, they were perfectly fine with big tech. They were perfectly okay. Remember, prior to even though the reason why the whole TikTok ban thing came on is because they were unwilling to play the game that President Biden wanted them to play. So the moment they weren't willing to start cutting people and censoring folks, all of a sudden TikTok is bad. Like they didn't know that the company was owned by a Chinese company prior to that. And that's what Democrats do. They loved Elon Musk. He was the smartest man in the world when he was on the blue team. But the moment they started pushing these crazy ideologies, where even he said, oh my God, and he labeled it the woke mind virus. Now Elon bad. He's not smart anymore. Jeff Bezos, he was great until the Washington Post was unwilling to just blindly support Kamala Harris. Oh, now nobody likes the Washington Post and it's right wing. These people make me sick. They really do. But I just wanted to see JD handle that like a boss, like he's supposed to. And man, hey, thank you so much for watching. I'm Brian Maxwell, and I look forward to seeing you at the top. If you haven't, hit that like button, and if you aren't subscribe. I'll never ask you for a cash app. I'll never ask you for a super chat. But your like is currency. It helps us get the information out. Thank you. Peace.